Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I do have my remarks written. Apologies, I have to do that for my sanity. But good morning, everyone. I am so pleased to see such a large group here today, or perhaps it's just a small room. I think maybe a combination of both. I could not be more excited to learn from all the presenters and conversations to come. I know a lot of you, and I'm even more thrilled to see many faces that I haven't met yet. Thank you to Delaware for hosting us here at the beautiful Verdon Center. This is my first time in this space, and it's really been a pleasure so far. Christy Liskey is with DENREC, and she is our chair for the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Planning Committee. We also have Kim Cole here, also from DENREC, who is a member of the Marco Management Board. And I want to extend a warm welcome to Leslie Reese, who is Chief of Staff at DENREC, who will be providing some opening remarks for us as well. So thank you so much, DENREC crew, for being here today. To kick things off, I want to acknowledge that this is the 6th Regional Ocean Forum. And the purpose of us all gathering here today is to bring coastal and ocean stakeholders together to foster robust exchange and collaboration across multiple state and federal government agencies, tribes, non-governmental entities, and other ocean stakeholders to promote informed decision-making around regional ocean planning. I want to focus right now on the word collaborate. Because one of my favorite things about the forum is that it gives us an opportunity to get to know people outside of our normal day-to-day. Throughout the day today and tomorrow, I encourage everyone to step outside of your network and talk to somebody that you may not know. Not only do we have people from dozens of different governmental agencies, organizations, and industries here today, we also have in attendance a list that spans career stages. I extend a particular warm welcome to all the students that have arrived here today, and I encourage everyone to take a look at the poster presentations that we have set up during lunch today. I next want to turn our attention to the phrase regional ocean planning. Ocean planning is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. However, it can be a little bit more nuanced in practice. In 2009, the 5 governors of the Marco states recognized that the Mid-Atlantic region's coastal ocean resources and people are intrinsically linked components of larger ecosystems. The Mid-Atlantic Ocean Planning Committee includes the states, federal agencies, tribes, and fisheries managers, and we host this convening every year to bring people and places and prosperity into planning for one ecosystem that we all share, that includes humans and the environment. We have a lot of work to do over the next 2 days, and I'm very excited to take what we learn today and tomorrow back to the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Planning Committee's many work groups and collaborative efforts. With that, I'm so pleased to welcome Mr. Tony McDonald, who is the director of the Monmouth University Urban Coast Institute and who will serve as our facilitator for today's meeting. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Thanks, Avalon, and thanks, everybody, for coming, and the others that will join us over the next 2 days, and also a third day. So if you haven't, there's an opportunity to have some field trips, I think, on Wednesday. So we'll sort of follow up on that. So hopefully you'll get to enjoy outside in the beautiful coast of Delaware. I was fortunate to own a home in Lewis for 10 years, so it's great to be back and see the wonderful things that are going on and the great job they're doing in Delaware. So my job today and my job on a regular basis, I facilitate the Mid-Atlantic Council on the Ocean. So I continue to work with partners at the federal, state, and tribal agencies. And I like to build on Avalon's observation that we don't manage to, we manage for, we manage with, and we can't do it without all of the inputs that we're going to be getting over the next 2 days and on an ongoing basis. So just a couple of housekeeping tools. We have a very busy agenda. So again, it's going to be a little hard, so we encourage people to please be aware of people's time and move in and out of the sessions in an efficient way. Bathroom's always the most important job as a facilitator. There's 2 of them right over here, and there's 2 of them over by the posters as well. So the poster and lunch session is over in the adjacent building, and as Avalon said, really please talk to all the students who have really committed to bringing these posters to us and share with them today. I do point out we do have some folks joining us virtually as well. So please try to speak up if you have questions. I encourage folks online. There is a function in the chat function that if you have any questions, please put them into the chat functions. We'll try, time allowing, to try to get to some of those questions, but be assured that even if we don't get to them today, we will keep those questions and be sure to follow up in the work that we continue to do as well. Hopefully, folks have signed up for the WOVA app, so if you haven't already, please do that. If you need a pretty intimate thing, you'll probably be able to not get lost or lose track of the agenda, but if you would sign that, we do have some questions and interactive elements of that. And also, it builds community, so we like to sort of use that also to build community among the folks who are here, as Avalon said, to take that moving forward. So I'm just going to move right to it a little bit, given the limits of time. Really, as Avalon said, we really are going to be looking, and hopefully you'll look at the arc of the agenda and you'll see some of the things we talked about. The reality is that it's a busy ocean, and there's a lot of activity you will be hearing about, and a lot of efforts underway to understand it better. I like to say informed management. We, at our foundation, at the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Policy Council, have always been looking at spatially informed planning and management, so you'll hear a lot about data and how that can actually activate decisions and make a greater understanding to resolve conflicts and try to manage that. So really think a little bit about how we can bring the knowledge in a way that's actionable, because I think that's everybody as managers. We need to be transparent so that the public understands why we're making the decisions and why we sometimes have to make difficult trade-off decisions. So again, the arc of the meeting is pretty clear. We'll spend a fair amount of time on this morning around data sharing and marine spatial planning and some very specific and generalized elements about that and how we work around that. Again, the breaks, again, encourage you to come in and out quickly for those breaks. We can do that. Talk to a friend, but please come back. Really want to iterate during lunch, which will be over in that adjacent room, and fortunately it's a beautiful day to have some people out on the terrace, and the posters will be set up over there. And then we'll come back into the main room before the afternoon sessions and just sort of be directed to the breakouts. So that's all I have to say. So with that, I will just thank everybody for joining us today and turn it over to our hosts and ask Christy Liskey to come up.
Welcome, everyone, to the small but beautiful state of Delaware. What a gorgeous and appropriate setting here at the campus of University of Delaware in Lewis to have the 6th Mid-Atlantic Ocean Forum. Here in Lewis, the maritime and cultural history is on full display where the Delaware Bay meets the Atlantic, and where you can see how the quaint but lively coastal towns really contribute to how special Delaware is. And if you're not familiar with the area, I hope you can get a small taste of what brings millions of visitors to Delaware each year. While you're here, I highly recommend exploring Lewis, so where you can join us for trivia tonight at the Wheelhouse. We have a couple field trips going on Wednesday that'll be really exciting. But for those that don't get those experiences, we wanted to provide you with a brief video highlighting some of Delaware's treasured resources and uses. And just to explain, those boats that were sinking were for artificial reefs. We are not purposefully downing boats to have fun. That's not what we do here. But we thought it was a really great showcase of what our robust artificial reef system. We have 14 sites in the Delaware Bay and Atlantic Ocean, so we're really proud of those habitats and recreational opportunities that we've provided. So now to get to the real reason we're all here, which I've been told is not drinking orange crushes on the water. If you don't know what an orange crush is, please find me to be enlightened, and I will tell you. So we're here for the Ocean Forum. Thank you to the organizers of this event for putting on such an amazing program of informative presentations and engaging discussion. I'm very much looking forward to connecting with a lot of you that I have never gotten to meet in person. And thank you for participating in this forum. I know some of you traveled a long way, and we very much appreciate it. I have no doubt that we'll leave here more informed and invigorated to take on the myriad of challenges that this ocean provides for us. So, and in that respect, I couldn't be happier to introduce the Delaware Department of Natural Resources Chief of Staff, Leslie Reese. She has been with the department almost 9 years. She started in 2015, worked with the Office of the Secretary since 2017, and has worked her way up to Chief of Staff in the last year. She specializes in keeping all the trains moving and on track at the right time. She sees a spot and she fills it when there's a need. We are very grateful for you and thank you for coming today. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Yes, I have been with the department for almost 9 years, been a Delaware resident for more than 20, and I have to say, if you are not from the area, please make sure that you're getting out. I consider this area a treasure. I live in Milton. I've lived in Sussex County the entire duration I've been in Delaware, and it's amazing, so please make sure you take advantage. On behalf of Governor John Carney, Delaware Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control Secretary Sean Garvin, and Delaware Coastal Programs, I would like to welcome you all to the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Forum. Again, my name's Leslie Reese. I'm Chief of Staff for Delaware Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control, and I would like to thank the Mid-Atlantic Regional Council on the Ocean for providing me the opportunity to speak with you this morning. And like Avalon, my remarks are written, so apologies, and thank you for understanding. Like other coastal Atlantic states, we recognize our reliance on the ocean economy. Our tourism industry is the fourth largest private employer in the state. Today, as demands for ocean resources increase, as we look to build resilience to the impacts of climate change, and as we strive to preserve and protect ocean habitats, it is essential that we are planning for the sustainability of the ocean and the benefits it provides us. The information sharing, coordination, and collaboration that will take place among all of you here today builds upon previous work and will help identify new opportunities to help us address the challenges and changes to the Mid-Atlantic Ocean ecosystem. Our ocean and its inhabitants do not recognize state borders. Through Marco's work, we're better able to understand the regional impacts and challenges that changes to our ocean bring to our marine-based businesses, our tourism industry, and our environment. As we know, climate change is a primary driver of many of the ocean changes we're witnessing today. Delaware is the lowest lying state in the nation, and the impact of sea level rise poses an existential threat to our coastal communities, businesses, and the jobs they support. Sea levels at the Lewis tide gauge, just down the road from here, have risen more than 1 foot since 1900 and are expected to rise an additional 9 to 23 inches by 2050. We're continually working on initiatives to improve resiliency, as well as identifying long-term strategies to safeguard coastal residents and businesses. Beyond sea level rise, the ocean is getting warmer, disrupting the delicate ecological balance necessary to remain healthy. Extreme weather events are also increasing. According to NOAA, 2023 was a record year for damages attributed to climate. Across the U.S., 28 separate weather events, from hurricanes to floods to severe storms, each topped $1 billion in damages to the communities struck by them. All these challenges and many more highlight the need for a comprehensive regional approach in identifying and implementing effective strategies to protect and preserve our ocean and the communities whose economies are built around ocean-related activities. The work being done by MARCO and partner organizations is accomplishing just that. Their goals align directly with those outlined with the work of President Biden's Ocean Policy Committee. Among the primary goals of their Ocean Climate Action Plan is to create a carbon-neutral future without emissions that cause climate change and harm human health, accelerate solutions that tap the power of natural coastal and ocean systems to absorb and store greenhouse gases, reduce the climate threat, and protect communities and ecosystems against unavoidable changes. Also, they enhance community resilience to ocean change by developing ocean-based solutions that help communities adapt and thrive in our changing climate. The actions described in the Ocean Climate Action Plan also provide other benefits: good-paying jobs, workforce innovation, resilient food production, ecosystem health, and scientific knowledge. Climate change is also impacting marine habitats. Warming ocean waters are altering marine species ranges and migration patterns. Habitats that support commercial and recreational fisheries and other important economic activities in the region are facing multifaceted challenges. As essential components of Delaware's ecosystem, marine habitats provide countless ecosystem services, including supporting biodiversity, regulating climate, absorbing carbon dioxide, and providing clean air. Delaware is proud to host a particularly active and robust artificial reef system, as you saw in the video, with 14 sites in the Delaware Bay and Atlantic Ocean that support reef fish and expanded recreational fishing and diving. And I'm going to deviate from my remarks for just a moment because a little known fact, our artificial reef system actually contains about 100 or more subway cars that were retired from the New York subway system, and that has been in place longer than I've been with the department. But I always think it's just an interesting little morsel. Our pristine beaches, which I hope you can visit while you're here, provide habitat for the largest spawning population of horseshoe crabs and migrating shorebirds. Maintaining and preserving the health and resilience of these ecosystems in the face of climatic changes and increased human use are among the top priorities for Delaware. And we're grateful for the partnerships we are able to leverage through MARCO to address these challenges. Just last year, through the MARCO Marine Debris Work Group, we were able to secure funding for the City of Rehoboth to purchase and install a water bottle refill station to help reduce the use of plastic water bottles. And more refill stations will be installed along our coast to combat the issue of marine debris. Another area where MARCO's work is providing essential information is in helping coastal managers, decision makers, and public and private stakeholders understand potential interactions between offshore wind development, marine life, and various ocean uses and resources. All of these areas, renewable energy, marine habitat, and the impacts of climate change, affect all of us. Determining the extent of those impacts and formulating plans to address them requires the use of our best available data. And MARCO's Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal provides a valuable resource for using science-based information in the decision-making process. The portal houses and displays thousands of data layers that help coastal managers, decision makers, and members of the public understand potential interactions between human activities and their impact on our ocean. In developing Delaware's Ocean and Bay Plan, information from the portal helped us visualize ocean resources and activities for ocean planning and decision-making purposes. During the information gathering and plan development process, we received input from more than 55 stakeholder organizations and 50 members of the public regarding what ocean uses, resources, and issues are important to them. When complete, Delaware's Ocean and Bay Plan will identify best practices to minimize conflict, which may include mitigation efforts to reduce or ease tensions. It will also include ocean-based climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies, and a gaps analysis on ocean resource management data. Additionally, a GIS-based ocean and bay planning tool will offer a dynamic visualization platform for both current and prospective users of ocean and bay areas. The tool will enable users to understand the interactions between various activities and resources. Moreover, it will facilitate exploration of best practices for effectively balancing ocean and bay activities with the conservation of marine resources, all while minimizing potential conflicts. Another area where data plays an essential role and where DENREC's priorities align closely with MARCO, as well as many of the organizations represented here today, is environmental justice. MARCO's commitment to identify resources and data that inform the public and member entities on past and current ocean injustices and increase understanding of disproportionate vulnerability to harm will help ensure that we do not repeat past shortfalls and that everyone has the opportunity to share equitably in benefits as a result of ocean use and/or development. In February of last year, DENREC hired the agency's and the state's first environmental justice coordinator. Since launching DENREC's Environmental Justice Office, the office has used best practices and third-party assessments to build institutional capacity in support of meaningful participation, including development of processes and policies promoting standardization and refining communication pathways. The office also collaborated with stakeholders and across DENREC divisions to launch a website comprised of a suite of environmental justice pages to foster and encourage two-way communication between the public and the department. The website is regularly updated to integrate feedback and other identified community needs. Some of the highlighted features include a comments and feedback form, an email link for easy access, guidance for meaningful public comments, key pages and documents in Spanish and Haitian Creole, and information on Title VI compliance. We also launched a publicly available DENREC EJ Area Viewer to assist in determining the need for enhanced outreach in equity focus areas and limited English neighborhoods. Data review sessions were held to confirm the fidelity of the data, and sections and divisions across DENREC were encouraged to help identify and produce authoritative data layers. At DENREC, we understand that environmental justice is not something we just read about and put back on the shelf. Rather, it is something that is incorporated into our DNA and into our decision-making processes. Having a partner organization such as MARCO, with such an extensive reach across the region, sharing in similar goals and objectives, demonstrates the growing commitment we have toward equity, inclusion, justice, and accessibility. In closing, I'd just like to reiterate that the progress we are making in protecting our ocean and the successes we have achieved across a wide spectrum of priority areas would not be possible without the work and partnerships represented in this room today. Each of you has played an important role in moving the regional efforts forward by sharing your insights, idea, and knowledge, and I thank MARCO for bringing us together to continue our work. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you this morning.
Great, thank you, Tony, and thank you, Delaware, for hosting us here in the lovely state of Delaware. I always love coming here, especially this area. It's beautiful. So I'm Kevin Hassel. I'm with New Jersey's Coastal Management Program. So I'm just going to be introducing our session here. So welcome to the first session of our 6th annual Ocean Forum, the Data Sharing and Marine Spatial Planning. We have a wonderful panel today, so we're going to have 3 presentations, and then we'll have some time for a question and answer session as we go through that. So I think the title of this session really helps distill down all what we've been doing for all these years. But there's always more to do. There's a lot happening in the ocean. I think everyone has spoken to that so far today. Some of it's been happening for a very long time, and some of it's new. But there's also a lot of things that are changing in the ocean. So you have climate change impacts, shifting species, ocean acidification, extreme storms, things like that. But with that said, I think it's probably the best time to be interested in research in the ocean. There's an unprecedented amount of research happening, and it's coming from a lot of various funding sources. I think it's clear that there's a priority on people that are concerned about what's happening in the ocean and what we're doing. So we have tons of research happening. We have tons of data being developed, and I feel we have a responsibility to coordinate all that research and make sure that we're providing meaningful access to all of that data that gets developed with that. With that being said, I think that's critical to improving our understanding of the ocean. Planning and policy development, it can't happen without all that new data that's coming in, whether you're interested in conservation and management or if you're looking at project development for offshore wind energy, say. So better coordination and data sharing, it's allowing for better decision-making from people like me that are in coastal management programs, regulatory programs. It helps with the planning that's happening across the various entities that we have here. It provides a lot more transparency about the decision-making that we're doing, so it enables everyone to actually understand why we might be doing something or what's happening out there. And it helps us clearly communicate the work that we're doing. So we have a challenge ahead of us, but I think it's one that we can all work together to accomplish. And I think we'll hear a lot about that today with this panel and throughout the forum for the rest of the 2 days here. So I'm going to keep our intros brief. I'll read what Tony said. If you haven't already done so, look on the app. There's great connections for the folks that are on the panel, but also the logistics of everything that's going on. But you can see everyone's bios and as well as linkages to all the work that they do. So it's great to have that available for us. First up, I'd like to invite Dr. Rachel Blake. She's the Director of Data Science at Intertidal Agency. She'll be talking about implementing data governance for collaborative ocean data sharing. So, Rachel.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me here to talk about some work that I've been working on recently at Intertidal Agency. We are a small nonprofit organization, and we work to support ocean data collaboratives. I want to acknowledge my co-authors on this talk, Kate Wing, Executive Director at Intertidal Agency, as well as Emily Shimchenia at the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative for Offshore Wind. Both of them are not with us today, but are instrumental in the work that we're doing on data sharing and collaborative ocean data sharing. That's a term Avalon brought up this morning. You're going to hear it a lot in my talk here as well. And the way that we are implementing this through data governance. So when talking about data governance, if people have different definitions of what that term is, then it often becomes confusing. So in our work, we use a pretty broad definition of data governance to encompass the people, the processes, the policies, and the standards around data, as well as the technical infrastructure that supports the implementation. Data governance really connects the why of sharing data, so the strategy and the goals of sharing data, to the how and how it's implemented. So in that way, it's data management plus more. It's more than just basic data management. It's not just controls on who can access data or building a new app or other widget, but what we typically refer to, what we do is the people layer of data sharing. And this is because people are collecting data, people are managing data, they're deciding who can access and use data and how it can be reused. Ultimately, this leads to a mindset shift in how data is thought about as an asset, and how the stewarding of that data is important for everyone who comes in connection with that data, who touches that data. It becomes the responsibility to steward that data in a responsible way. So this is not a new concept. It's not something that we've come up with, but it is a concept that has been in professional data training in both the public and private sectors. However, for ocean and academic research, it is a relatively new concept that we're bringing in. Data governance makes it possible to share data in a responsible manner. But why isn't data being shared, more shared? There's some data being shared, but why isn't more of it being shared? Is there an app for that? The short answer is no. In 2021, we at Intertidal led an NSF Convergence Accelerator project looking at barriers to ocean data sharing. And in more than 50 interviews across ocean industries, academia, community leaders, NGOs, and tribes, we heard 4 main elements that could help improve data sharing for the ocean. One is aligning around a clear purpose for sharing data. Another is having incentives that are aligned for sharing that data. And also important is building trust between the participants in the data sharing effort. And finally, access to technical and legal support that can enable data sharing. So if these elements aren't addressed, data can get stuck, can never be shared, and ultimately won't be usable or reusable for addressing new questions. So these are all critical components and topics for large collaborative, multi-sector, transdisciplinary work that is going on at regional levels within the Atlantic Ocean. Data needs to be accessible to people from with different capacities and who use different systems. And that's certainly the case with the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative for Offshore Wind, which I'm just going to abbreviate RWSC so I don't stumble over it. RWSC was established in 2021 as a joint effort between 4 sectors, federal and state agencies, offshore wind companies, and environmental NGOs. And it's hosted by NROC and MARCO because these organizations have expertise and experience in cross-sector ocean planning, coordination, and facilitation. So ultimately, RWSC is a coordination hub for all of this research and the community around offshore wind and wildlife. When we started our work as Intertidal with RWSC, we wanted to understand what the community needs were around data governance. And so last fall, we had a workshop to help us try and identify and spell out some of those needs. And what we heard from the community was a need for improved literacy around data, data architecture, and data policies and sharing. Also a need for consistent and repeatable processes and tools, a clear direction on how to do things and when. And finally, a need to develop and support a culture of data sharing and collaboration where participants know what the expectations are, they know what their roles are around data at every part of the data lifecycle. And we use these learnings from this workshop to help develop and write the data governance chapter of the science plan for RWSC. So in January of this year, RWSC released the full science plan, which identifies key research areas for offshore wind and wildlife. It encourages coordination among all the participants in the research community and emphasizes a need for better data management and governance. And if you haven't had a chance to read the science plan yet, it's available on RWSC's website, and I encourage you to take a look. The data governance chapter of the science plan describes a series of tasks that we have started to undertake during this year. So far, we've established a data governance subcommittee. We have stood up this committee and had 1 meeting so far with a 2nd meeting planned in June. And this subcommittee is tackling large tasks that cross all of the subject matter expertise within this research community. The rest of the tasks we're currently undergoing work on, and they're at different phases of work and progress at this point in time. And I'll walk through some of the highlights on some of this work in the next few slides. So mapping the data ecosystem for offshore wind and wildlife can help us understand how information flows, how data flows, and how these different parts of this data ecosystem are connected. It can illuminate where there might be bottlenecks and where data might get stuck or siloed. What you're seeing here on this slide is 3 core components of this data ecosystem as we're envisioning it. The research database in purple there is currently live on the RWSC website and hosts information about planned and ongoing research projects. The map of deployed offshore wind research assets and activities, which you see there in green, is under development and will be connected to the research database, and it will show areas where their data is being collected, so where there's sensors, where there's surveys planned, and things like that. And finally, the third component here is the data catalog, which is also under design and development right now, and will host metadata for the data sets collected by the research projects in the database. And will also connect to the map and show where those data sets are connected to particular assets and activities. Another important part of data governance is developing common policies and clear guidance, as I mentioned before. And part of what we've been working with RWSC to do is to draft a data policy. The aim of this policy is to provide guidance for funded researchers and the rest of the research community on data sharing, publications, and intellectual property. Some of the key points that the policy will address are data sharing, timeliness and requirements, confidential and proprietary data, and options for licensing data and research assets. The policy is currently under legal review, and then we'll go to internal review at RWSC, followed by implementation and sharing with the community. We've also undertaken a review of repositories recently as part of developing guidance for data sharing. And these repositories were identified in the science plan by subject matter experts who wrote each of the chapters in the science plan. So the aim was to identify common repositories across these subject matter chapters, to understand the standards that each repository has for metadata and data, and to compare the key characteristics of each repository against a minimum criteria that we developed. So of the 32 repositories that we reviewed, about 1/3 of them were considered data repositories. The rest are really important assets for accessing data, for storing physical samples, or for providing sampling guidance. So our next steps following this review are to contact repositories and actually have conversations to learn more about what services they provide, to fill in some of the gaps in our review by recommending repositories where there might not be one recommended for a particular data type, and to work with the ocean data community to increase repository robustness. Our repository review is also being used to inform the creation of the offshore wind and wildlife data catalog that I mentioned before. This effort is still in the beginning design phase, but the aim is to provide a central place where data about offshore wind and wildlife can be discovered through the provision of metadata. So the idea is not to duplicate data sets or to make yet another repository for data, but to contain metadata and then link out to data that are hosted in repositories that are perhaps where subject matter experts might expect to find that data and where the community typically puts those data. It will also be important for the data catalog to connect with and share information with the other key components of the data ecosystem that I highlighted before in that diagram, the database of projects and the map of surveys and assets and activities, data collection activities. So our next steps here are to conduct user research with the community this summer and then to continue our own ongoing exploration of service providers and software platforms for this data catalog. Two other critical components of implementing data sharing and governance and stewardship are training and guidance, and we aim to provide this to the RWSC and the offshore wind and wildlife research community. These activities support the other governance work that I've already mentioned before. One example is during the workshop last fall, we really had a chance to dive into data journeys and workflows so that we could understand where there were bottlenecks or hurdles that might come up in a data life cycle, where data could get stuck or potentially siloed. We've also been considering other trainings to support this work on data standardization, budgeting for data governance and stewardship in new grants or contracts, and data licensing and data use agreements. And these trainings will be developed as the community expresses needs for these or other topics that might come up. As we do this work, we're also assembling information and guidance that will assemble into a handbook. We're thinking of this as a data handbook, but it could be a data governance handbook. It could be expanded a little bit beyond that. But what it will do is probably contain templates, for example, for data management and sharing plans, maybe data collection templates so that data can be standardized from the get-go. Guidance on sharing data and how data can be contributed to the data ecosystem. Data policy guidance for both funded researchers that are funded through the RWSC and as well as researchers that are doing research connected with a science plan. And a list of recommended repositories, which I've already mentioned, that will come out of our review that we've just done. So that's all I have for you today. I want to thank you for letting me share some of our work on data sharing and governance with the RWC, and I look forward to any questions in the panel.
Great, thank you so much. Next up, we have Kylie Dancy, the Fishery Management Specialist with the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries and Management Council. She'll be talking to us about the East Coast Climate Change Scenario Planning Initiative that she's been heading up. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm happy to be here. I'm based at the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council, which is just up the road in Dover. So unfortunately, I have to leave for another meeting, so I'm bummed to miss the anything after this morning, but I'm happy to be here to talk about the East Coast Climate Change Scenario Planning Initiative, which is to inform coordinated East Coast fisheries management response to change. So if you're unfamiliar with the organizations managing marine fisheries on the U.S. East Coast, it's a little bit complex, lots of different jurisdictions here. We have, on the East Coast, there are 3 regional fishery management councils that have primary jurisdiction for management in federal waters, and they recommend measures to NOAA Fisheries as the implementation and enforcement agency. We also have the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission managing state waters and its 15 member states that all have individual management programs as well. And, you know, these political boundaries, understandably, we've had a variety of different mechanisms for managing the species that span across these boundaries, including a variety of different cooperative and joint management plans as needed. But there are a lot of species in the Northeast that are tending to move north and east and into deeper waters, and we also have a lot of our managed species in the Northeast that have been identified as highly vulnerable or very highly vulnerable to species distribution changes due to climate change. And this is really exacerbating some of our existing governance and management challenges. So the reasons behind this scenario planning initiative were partially because of the species availability changes leading to increased tensions over management representations as our governance systems stay pretty static and our species distributions are changing. We've also recognized that a lot of our management procedures, particularly at the federal level, are not very nimble. They're not going to be able to provide us with frequent and efficient ability to respond to change. And we've always had a bit of difficulty coordinating management and monitoring efforts across jurisdictional and regional boundaries, but that is becoming increasingly important as we see more changes resulting from climate change. And so the organizations that are participating in this decided to undertake a scenario planning process to think about this. And this is scenario planning is a tool, a strategizing tool for planning and action in the context of an uncertain future. And so what the scenarios are is basically stories about potential conditions and how the world might turn out tomorrow. And those stories are used to facilitate discussions and potentially change the minds and actions of people. So the organizations, excuse me, participating here are the 3 East Coast Regional Fishery Management Councils, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, and a couple different offices of NOAA Fisheries. This project started in 2020 to explore how East Coast fishery governance and management issues will be affected by climate-driven change in fisheries, and with a particular focus on the stock distribution issue. And also another objective was to advance specific tools and processes to help us manage fisheries in an era of climate change. And I won't get into the kind of the process details, but just to quickly note, this was a multi-year initiative with several phases that started in late 2020. And the scenario planning itself wrapped up in the spring of 2023, but now we have sort of the next phase of the process, which is where we get to figure out how to actually implement these actions that we've identified and monitor different conditions. So as part of our process, one of the things that we did was identify different oceanographic, biological, and socioeconomic drivers of change in the fisheries. And this slide shows some examples. We looked at many more, but this unique thing, good thing about the scenario planning framework is it allows kind of simultaneous consideration of lots of different factors that are influencing or likely to influence East Coast fisheries, including things like productivity changes, habitat changes, sea level rise, market factors. So there was obviously a lot going on and some of these are climate driven and some of them maybe not, but they're all going to interact to impact what our fisheries look like in the future. And so at our scenario creation workshop in 2022, we got a bunch of participants together to talk about all of these different conditions and ongoing forces of change, and to create different pictures basically of how the world might look, the East Coast fisheries world might look in 20 years, and create these plausible, challenging, relevant, and memorable stories about U.S. East Coast fisheries. We ended up with 4 final scenarios, and I don't have time to talk about the details of these, but essentially we used a common scenario planning framework, which is a 2x2 matrix where we have 2 different axes of uncertainty. Horizontal axis is how predictable our change is going to be, and what is our ability to assess our fish stocks and assess different changes going to look like, from less predictable to more predictable. And then on the vertical axis, you have stock productivity and replacement. Is that increasing or maintained, or is it mostly declining? So you have these 4 different situations, and we did develop full narratives for each of these with a bunch of different other driving forces incorporated. But this is just a snapshot of what they look like. And then we used those as a platform to discuss changes in fisheries management and governance that would be needed to position ourselves better under each of these scenarios. So we asked managers to think about, what would need to change now? What should we be doing now? What should we be avoiding now to better position ourselves for governance and management in an era of climate change? And through that applications process, we identified a number of potential actions to take. So one of the major products of the initiative is what we call a potential action menu. And that is a living document that is intended to serve as a planning tool that guides the work of these individual groups and collectively where we need to coordinate. And it kind of expands on the actions that were raised during the process and identifies some next steps, some lead groups, barriers to getting these done, and their priority level. And so there's quite a range of things in this action menu, ranging from things that are pretty simple and straightforward to address, and then things that may be extremely complex and are pretty conceptual at this stage. We are still in the beginning stages of addressing these actions, and some of them we, frankly have no idea how we're going to address yet. So there are 3 thematic work areas in this action menu, including the obvious cross-jurisdictional governance topic, and then a topic for managing under increased uncertainty, so strategies to make our management system more flexible and adaptable and robust. And then for the purposes of the rest of the presentation, I want to focus on the data sources and partnerships, which is about kind of a lot of different things under here, but finding ways to prioritize data needs, make partnerships better for monitoring and evaluating the impacts of change. So with all these different conversations within the data sources and partnerships themes, we really heard very strongly that across everything, there's sort of a need for improved communication, increased strategic coordination, and new partnerships across all of our organizations, our jurisdictions, our regions, and our sectors, as well as, I think, beyond the fisheries world. So some of that is needed for better prioritizing our data and our monitoring needs. We want to find ways to use existing funding more efficiently under the assumption that we may not have a huge influx of new funding. We need to figure out better ways to use our existing funds. The participants identified the need to improve data management and sharing across groups and regions, and enhancing fishing industry data collection and our cooperative research efforts, and then creating and new data partnerships and strengthening data partnerships. So just a couple of quick examples of some of the types of actions that are in this section of the document. The first one, which is a high priority, is to expand the study fleet in the Northeast to include recreational fisheries and to make better use of study fleet data. So right now there is a small commercial fishing industry study fleet in the Northeast that's about 50 vessels that engages fishermen in high-resolution data collection. And there was participants in the scenario planning process saw a lot of value in expanding that to a recreational study fleet because we really lack fine-scale information about recreational fisheries. And then also folks saw a potential for longer-term improving our recreational catch estimation process. So the goals and next steps, so we need to make sure that that data is used both in the commercial study fleet and if we expand it to the recreational side. Exploring incentives for industry participation is potentially a good idea here. And then the last bullet is just to note that there is currently an ongoing pilot project in New England for a recreational study fleet that was a direct result of this process and this recommendation. So depending on the results of that, we will consider lessons learned to expand that. Offshore wind, obviously a big issue. This report wouldn't be complete without some action related to offshore wind. There are challenges with fisheries monitoring in terms of the offshore wind turbines limiting fishery-independent trawl survey access, which we've long used to monitor our fisheries. And so it does provide an opportunity to redesign and potentially transition to industry-based or other surveys. And so another ongoing action is implementing NOAA Fisheries and BOEM's federal survey mitigation implementation strategy. We are looking at ways to further explore use of commercial vessels for industry-based surveys, and we need to develop a plan for integrating multiple survey data streams into our fisheries stock assessments, and including incorporating, new surveys and tying that to potentially the old survey data streams. The action D4 is also related largely to fishery independent survey data, and that is to standardize data collection to break down geographic barriers along the East Coast. There's a lot of different surveys and data collection efforts with varying protocols and varying data accessibility. We did hear during the process that there are a lot of scientific or regional silos where data may not be accessible, and sometimes folks are really unaware that efforts are even happening to monitor, or unaware of surveys that are out there. So some of the goals for this action are to consider where we could potentially standardize survey methodology across regions, and maybe if we can't do that, looking at modeling frameworks to combine different data, developing data standards for the ease of combining data, and data management and storage protocols that will improve our ability to access and standardize data across groups and regions. Action D7, I think, is a favorite of mine, looking at ways to modernize data management to facilitate better sharing and to prepare for an influx of new data streams. If we're thinking about all the different monitoring efforts that are out there and potentially new data streams coming from other ocean users like offshore wind, we need to figure out a way to deal with that and a way to get that data and use that data. So there's a need for more strategic management and sharing processes between regions and groups. We've recommended that there be personnel dedicated to fostering partnerships and coordinating that data collection and sharing between other ocean users, and also recommended that new partnerships be formed with non-fisheries agencies and organizations, including a broad range of groups, management, federal entities, academia, NGOs, other ocean users. We really need to look a little bit beyond the fisheries world here and develop some stronger partnerships. And then mechanisms of sharing any potential funding sources, collaboration opportunities, and data gaps that, maybe we have a data need that might be easily filled by something else that's going on out there. I don't have time to get into too many more details, but there are a couple other interesting actions, like improve the use of existing data and focusing on artificial intelligence to aid in data processing and analysis, and then developing a process where we can work with science organizations to prioritize data needs for climate-ready management. So that's about all I have. There's more information. We have a website for the Scenario Planning Initiative, as well as a website for a new group that's been formed to kind of oversee addressing the actions, and that's the East Coast Climate Coordination Group. And as I mentioned, I won't be here after this morning, but feel free to email me with any questions. And I also want to quickly note that we do have a scenario planning toolkit that if you're interested in kind of applying similar conversations, there's a lot of resources here that we developed to have these conversations in other venues. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kylie. It's good to hear about all that effort that's going into those collaborations and coordination efforts. Next up, we have Jesse Clearly. He's a geographer from Duke's Marine Geospatial Ecology Lab. Jesse's going to be talking to us today about some of the marine life distribution and abundance model updates that we have going on. So, thank you, Jesse.
Good morning, folks. Thanks for the introduction, Kevin, and appreciate the opportunity from the organizers to be here to talk about some of the existing work that we have in the region and some updates on distribution and abundance models. I also should mention one of my colleagues, Sarah DeLand, is here with me, and then we're presenting this work on behalf of a wide range of folks in our lab and regionally that help our work. So we're going to talk about our role kind of as part of the data distribution hub for Mid-Atlantic and Northeast Ocean data on marine species distributions. That'll include some of our work as part of the MDAT team for NROC and MARCO, which has been going on for many years, as well as some future work that we're working on related to offshore wind. So I'll spend just a few minutes talking about our MDAT work. For those of you that don't know that work, it has been going on for about 10 years now, kind of supporting the regional ocean partnerships, NROC and MARCO. And our lab at Duke has been sort of the lead of that project. The goal of that work is to take existing marine species distribution models that are created by a variety of different agencies and university labs and bring those together to support marine spatial planning, potentially outside of the original focus of the data development. And then so also to take some of the individual species information that exists and synthesize that with guidance from MARCO and NROC working groups and put that information online through some data portals, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So I included this slide here just mainly because it highlights the range of agencies and entities that we've worked with through this effort, the MDAT effort. Right, a lot of different logos here represented by folks in the room and elsewhere, collecting data for a variety of different purposes, state level, federal level, different permitting needs, different data needs. And so the MDAT work is really to take all of that existing information, those existing models, and better synthesize that to be useful potentially outside of the original context of the data collection. So we want to make that data as useful as long as we can. And so our MDAT work is to work with all of those individual entities, agencies, et cetera, synthesize that information in sort of a spatial way, put it into a kind of web GIS framework, and make it useful into the future. So the kind of thumbnail on where this starts is really information about the distribution of individual species that have been modeled by a variety of different folks. So Our lab at Duke models the distribution of marine mammals for kind of a broad geography, including the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, but including the Southeast as well. That includes about 30 species at an individual species level, although there are some species guilds in there as well. And we're producing predicted density of those animals at a monthly time step for this region. Colleagues at NOAA NCOS are producing predictive models for a variety of bird species. I think 49 species that they're producing. Again, that's mainly funded by BOEM, but we're, again, trying to make sure that those data are more broadly useful outside of that original context. That data is also predicted density at a monthly time step. For fish information, a lot of the data for that comes from our colleagues at NOAA NIMPS, and then it's been kind of synthesized for this project by folks at TNC. And so that's at a seasonal time step. And we have some new data on sea turtle distributions in the region for 4 species at a monthly time step, which are produced by colleagues at the Naval Undersea Warfare Center for naval permitting needs. So that's the starting point for a lot of the MDAT information. Those predictive layers across all of those species by month, and the uncertainty that goes along with them is thousands of GIS data layers. And so there was a desire in the regions to synthesize or summarize that information into a little bit more digestible chunks. And so in addition to that, we've taken some of those models and then produced what we call summary products, where we'll take information for a given species group, let's say baleen whales or ESA-listed cetaceans, and produce these synthesis or summary products. So that could include kind of abundance of that group of taxa, that group of species, species richness, diversity calculations, or core abundance or biomass richness. So it's important, we always stress this when we give this talk about that the individual species information, of course, often has a direct management link, and so we don't lose that information by synthesizing it, right? That data continues to exist, of course, is really fundamental in a lot of ocean planning and decision-making. Those species groups or those summary products just give us a supplemental view of that information to kind of give us a more condensed view, and that both of those are appearing in ocean data portals in the region. So that's sort of the context on MDAT. That work has been going on for 10 years, and part of the reason why it keeps going on is that all of the folks that are producing those distribution models continue to update them over time. And so there's kind of a continuous need to take that information, those models from our colleagues, and then make those into make them useful for kind of the ocean planning data portal. So I'll give you just a quick couple of updates on how those data are changing. So the first one I'll mention is that the marine mammal models, which again are produced by our group at Duke, Jason Roberts leads that modeling team for us, has a new set of ocean predictive models for marine mammals that came out, released to the public on the ocean portals in February of this year. Includes some new changes in the methodology, new oceanographic covariates that are helping us with the predictions, new survey data sets that went into that. We improved the spatial resolution of those data, so now they're at 5 kilometers. Previously, they were at 10. And there were a few species changes in terms of what we were modeling there as well. And this is an animation here of North Atlantic right whale from the Northeast Ocean Data Portal. We also added some new species groups to our marine mammal information through MDAT. These came from NOAA's Marine Mammal Climate Change Vulnerability Assessment. And so there are a couple of different species groups there that we then synthesize into that, kind of group abundance or biomass summary products. Species that are high or have high or very high overall vulnerability to climate change, as well as groups of species that are high or very highly sensitive to climate-driven changes in their distribution, their abundance, or their phenology or seasonality. So we're kind of grouping species in that way, producing summary products for those species groups. So other updates, our colleagues at NOAA NCOS are producing seabird predictive models. There's a new set of those which we put on the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic Ocean data portals in the last 2 weeks. Again, different improvements in modeling methodology and covariates for those predictions. They have now moved to a monthly resolution. They were previously at a seasonal time step. However, they did degrade the spatial resolution. It had been previously at 2 kilometers, and now we're at 10 kilometers. And the driving force for that is just for us to get to monthly time step, we've got to have these kind of bigger cells, I think. And they've changed the species composition slightly as well in terms of adding a few more species. And this is Arliss Winship and his group and the NOAA Biogeography group that are producing those models. Yeah, so those are some recent updates, new marine mammal models, new avian models, upcoming work that we're working on in the next 6 months. There's been an interest from both regions in data showing change over time. Of course, we know that changes are occurring. What can we see in these data sets that supports our understanding of what that change looks like? So we're currently working on 2 different data sets that are showing change over time in the predictions for North Atlantic right whale and for humpback whales. The right whale information is coming out of a new paper. Jason Roberts has it, just came out in the last few weeks. And that map is a panel from that paper that describes places where right whale abundance is predicted to be increasing over the last 10 years compared to the 10 years previous. We'd like to do some information, to produce some information, spatial information about migration timing and patterns. And so that could be part of this change over time theme of work. And thinking also about changes in fish biomass, of course, since we have a really long-running time series of fish information from our colleagues at NIMS. And then also kind of linked with our colleagues here at our panel, information from the Northeast Regional Marine Fish Habitat Assessment. And we're working with them to take information from that new data piece of work to bring that into the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic ocean data portals. So that's just a quick thumbnail on work that our lab has been doing through MDAT, through that kind of broad collaboration with a lot of regional stakeholders and data providers. Our lab has several other data projects of interest that I'll just kind of quickly thumbnail here. We are working on new North Atlantic right whale models. We have a project with DFO Canada to think about building a transboundary North Atlantic right whale predictive model. I think the current data sets currently go under the Scotian Shelf, but our colleagues at DFO have, of course, observations and surveys that go further north than that into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So we're going to produce a transboundary density surface with DFO, and then DFO is then producing a probability of occurrence model for this kind of broad transboundary region, probably available in spring of next year. We are currently working on a proposal with NOAA and BOEM to think about whether we can build a near real-time predictive model for right whale distribution. And so this is kind of a little bit of a scary slide to think about actually building this workflow, but the idea is that we would be able to take near real-time observations of the ocean as well as sightings or passive acoustic detections for right whales and produce a prediction of right whales at a really high resolution time step. And so we're working to build out a proposal for this and then think about how we would distribute that information to regional colleagues. Mostly in a proof of concept kind of framework, but if this is successful and something that adds a lot of utility to the kind of ocean planning and management needs in the region, this is something we can flesh out, I think, into a more robust system. So I'll mention a little bit here on another project that we're working on with BOEM and the Department of Energy, Project WOW, or Wildlife and Offshore Wind. The goal here of this project, which again is led by our group at Duke and some others at Duke, but is a consortium of, I think, 14 or 16 different partners, some of whom are in the room here, but is to think about building a framework or a system for evaluation of the potential impacts of offshore wind on wildlife. So the species abundance and distribution information that I've just spoken about and that we're developing really contributes to one part of this framework that we're developing here to look at the impact of offshore wind, which is, so we're thinking about a framework that includes, the occurrence of marine animals, their exposure risk and consequences, that occurrence piece is being driven by a lot of the information that we've just talked about. MDAT data is talking about where those animals are at what time of the year. We're also doing a little bit of work to think about guiding field work. That's part of that. And part of the framework here is to think about survey design that can give you the statistical power that you need to be able to detect whether changes are occurring. And so the MDAT data that we've talked about here is helpful at driving the location and timing of some of that survey effort. And so as part of that, we've done a little bit of work to characterize the abundance and temporal variability of animal distributions within wind lease areas across the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. Using the cetacean information I already mentioned that our group produces, avian models from our NCOS colleagues, as well as the turtle models from NUIC, and just looking at the changes over time of those species within lease areas, within the regions surrounding those lease areas, and within the broader model extent, and trying to get a handle on whether the distributions that we see within those areas are regionally significant or kind of model-wide significant. So yeah, the last little connection that I'll mention here has already been talked about, so I don't have to butcher what RWSC actually stands for, but we are supporting a collaboration with RWSC and NROC to create a data portal. It was already spoken about that maps out kind of, or helps map out research activities in the region and related to offshore wind development and kind of putting together some of the back end of how that research planning portal takes place. And also worth noting, of course, that the convening power that RWSC has in terms of bringing together species experts is something that's really useful for the review of MDAT information as we talk about new species groups and we talk about how to bring new data sets into the regional ocean planning portals that the RWSC subcommittees that are focusing on various taxonomic groups are really helpful for that, of course. So with that, thank you so much again for the invitation to be here. Sarah and I will both be here for the full meeting and happy to talk with any of you on the sidelines of the meeting and participate in the panel. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. It's always great to see all the data that goes into improving our understanding of the ocean environment that you guys are doing. So, you know, we've heard a bit today about data development. We've heard about our need for better data governance, and we've seen a great examples of how we use that data to build better management decisions. You know, see, these are all opportunities for us to collaborate more and develop things that, you know, enable us to be more informed about the environment. So what we have now is we have an opportunity for a question and answer session. Please think if you guys have any questions. I mean, the forum's for all of you, so please answer some questions, ask some questions for our panel here as we get going. I know we have mics possibly running around if anyone has anything. But while we're waiting, if anyone has anything, you know, Dr. Blake, I know you were talking about the data governance and through the RWSC. Do you see opportunities to expand that beyond that? I know the project is working in that space, but clearly there was examples of that in the fisheries management world. But.
Thanks for that question, Kevin. Yeah, certainly. The work that we have partnered with RWSC to do, and really RWSC's intent is that the materials around data sharing and data governance will be shared with the larger research community so that folks working in other projects, working in other regions can learn from what RWSC is doing and advance, you know, data sharing. So we're not reinventing the wheel many times. So the idea is that the, you know, materials, you know, for example, the list of repositories, recommended repositories, once that has gone through review, that will be available to members of the research community and to anyone. That will be on the RWSC website. So that and other materials will be available.
Hi, I have a question for Dr. Blake. How do you, or what's the plan to balance storing the data from the private side of the industry, considering that the appendix are confidential in the reports that they release in like the offshore wind industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's one area where we're really working to establish that trust necessary for data sharing and potentially other types of data sharing rather than just what's typically, talked about, which is the dichotomy of open versus closed data. We're really trying to work in that sort of middle ground where data can be more shared, but maybe not fully open to, protect business interests, sovereignty, data sovereignty, and endangered species. So, there's not one particular way we're looking to address that, but that's certainly an area where we're actively working.
Thank you. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit to what is happening under the recent Federal Register notice about calling for changes in confidentiality around Magnuson-Stevens data, and less so about marine mammals, but more around things like fisheries data. I know the protected species are under a different sort of restrictions, but more about fisheries.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I don't know that much about, I think we recently learned of this, that NOAA issued a proposed rule about data confidentiality process and standards. And so the council is really, we just received a presentation about this recently, and we're still trying to figure out what it means for our data. And I know that we've submitted some comments. There are some concerns about, some of what's in there, but we're still trying to understand what it's going to mean for us. So sorry, I can't provide more on that.
Thank you. I'm Rodrigo Vargas, University of Delaware. I've been working with data governance for over 10 years with a different scientific community. And I agree that incentives are critical for this. So everyone loves data. Everyone would like to share data, but data is not shared for different reasons. So at the end of the day, it's incentives. And my experience is the carrot or the stick sometimes. So I would like to ask you, in terms of incentives, what do you think are the incentives for that community? What will make people share the data or not sharing? Because you are talking about private data, the industry, your government data, et cetera. So considering the diversity of stakeholders, what are the incentives that you have identified? And it's a general question.
I think for, relative to some of the fisheries data, it really varies based on who you're talking to. There's just such a wide variety of folks participating. I think a lot of the fishing industry participants would like to share their data, just they would be willing to if it's used. I think we have a struggle sometimes with folks wanting to share their data or being willing to, and then we collect it and we don't necessarily use it, and so or use it enough, I guess. So then I think some folks will be willing to share it just if it's useful, and then others may need different types of incentives, or perhaps special access or financial incentives. So I think it's really variable.
Yeah, I would echo that. We don't have any particular incentives that we're working on right now, but more broadly, incentives could include like tax credits for a company to share data, or somebody getting credit if that's how something important for career advancement for sharing data. So those sorts of incentives, I would echo that it varies widely, and we're sort of at this point looking broadly at many different incentives for data sharing.
Yeah, so I'll offer one other perspective here, that some of our work has been funded by a variety of different federal agencies, NASA, NOAA, the Navy, and some of those agencies, their incentive, for example, NASA wants to demonstrate their societal benefit to the satellite remote sensing network that they have. And so they're very much interested in putting those data into as many different useful cases and supporting as many different management applications as they can to kind of demonstrate back to U.S. taxpayers that having these satellites overhead are really valuable for kind of societal benefit. And then also the Navy that funds a lot of the cetacean distribution modeling has some requirements about making those data public so that there's some transparency in the permitting process as well. So sometimes that sort of incentive is sort of coming top down from the agencies that are funding this work.
Dr. Blake and Dr. Cleary, I think you mentioned a portal where we can look at other kinds of research that are going on. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the timeline for that project and what metadata we might be able to search using it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
So right now, what is available on the RWSC website is a database of ongoing and planned research projects. So there's information, some information about methods and, some basic information, title, people associated with the different projects and what data they're collecting. The other two parts that I described, the sort of map of assets and data collections, is under development, and I think that's what you were talking about, Jesse. And then the data catalog with where the metadata would be housed, that's also still under development. But the vision for that is really that you'd be able to understand what data sets you might want to or be able to reuse to answer new questions from the metadata that would be in that data catalog. And then you could link out to, like, let's say a repository, let's say, acoustic monitoring data at NCI. You could link out to where the data is actually housed and then access that data if it's available.
Yeah, that's a good question. One other element of it that I'll just add to that is that as we're building out the kind of data that would go into that, we're aware of the kind of change over time in what that network has looked like. And so we'd really like for folks to be able to come to this portal and show me the instruments that were in the water at a particular moment in time so that they could kind of link that with some other work that they might be doing at that time. So we want to make sure that we're capturing not just what it looks like right now, but what it has looked like through time.
Josh Kohut at Rutgers University. My question's on, I'm trying to look at all three of you, on data communication. And some of the different policies and activities that you've all presented, there are some examples out there of misuse of data as we get more and more publicly available data sets. And so I wonder if any of the conversations come in on ways to wrap in communication of data so that a non-expert or someone who wasn't collecting that data could use it in the way that it was intended rather than misusing it. And I don't know in any of the handbooks. I know a lot of the products, Jesse, that you and your lab are doing have a lot of communication components to it. But yeah, just wanted to bring up the general idea of communication and how that weaves into the different programs you presented.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. That's a really great fundamental question, too. I think we could do a better job of doing that. I think one of the places that we've always talked about with our modeling work is how we talk about uncertainty. And that I think we could do a better job of kind of communicating that we have all of these uncertainty layers that go along with the models that are really fundamental to understanding what they're saying and what they're not saying. And I think we need to have some, more science communication material around what those mean and how to use them. But yeah, it's a fundamental issue. And I really appreciate that science communication is its own discipline that's growing. And I think probably there are a number of folks in the room whose career interests are about that, and so we really need those folks to kind of help bridge that gap between the kind of science folks that are generating this in the public.
I'll just add to what Jesse said that I think providing more comprehensive data documentation and making that available, even if the data might not be publicly available, is one step to getting at that communication of appropriate use and reuse of data. So making sure that thorough documentation is available, let's say in the data catalog or in some other portal for derived data products is critical, I think. It's not the only thing, but it's important.
So, yeah, it's a little bit of a build off that. Thank you, Josh. But one general question, observation, and one specific one for Jesse, but really exciting stuff and incredible how much hard work is being done and needs to be done in order to advance this collaboration around data. So my broader question then is, if this presentation was given to a general public audience, how do we convince and get people in a room to say, because we're solving these particular problems, because we know there's a specific question around this data being a priority for Nick Napoli, how do we get people in a room to solve Nick's problem? How do we transfer the incredible hard work you're doing so that people really understand that we are getting together around solving this information is available for a specific decision that needs to be made? So that's kind of my general question. My follow-up specific to Jesse is on the WOW stuff. Is that looking at a system not only to inform the permitting and the management of the current sites, but also a system that will be continuous to inform adaptive management, so as the facilities come online, so that we understand it, are using an ongoing data system that manages it. So my general question is just, how do we take all your hard work and make it a little bit more real to people?
Thank you, Tony. That's, as always, a great, deep question. Yeah, because I think one of the challenges here is we've spoken about these data sets for us, in our case, and the kind of as having really broad utility. But your question is like, well, great, how does it become more specific in some ways? And so I think there's a science communication element to that, where you can say, here's a case where in this particular location for a particular management issue or permitting issue, these data have been applied in this particular way. So I think there's an opportunity to do that. Of course, many of the data sets that we collate and put into MDAT are generated for specific purposes. I mean, the Navy funds us to do this so they can take permitting for their training and testing activities, for example. So that's another, that starts specific and we make it more generally applicable. So yeah, but I think we could maybe tell those stories a little bit better, I think. And on the WOW piece, I know that I'm not sure how WOW is really gonna, and maybe Josh, you might know this, how it's gonna be come into force in terms of actual management of the installations. But for sure, we'd like for that framework to be applied in other geographies. I mean, that's one of the interests in BOEM and Department of Energy, is to be thinking about this framework and what it can mean for the survey planning that you might do before development actually happens, so you can actually detect whether changes are occurring there as well. So I don't know too much on the future end of management, but for sure it's going to help us with this sort of before and after kind of thinking.
Yeah, Mark Casey, Delaware Aquaculture Association. My question's really for the first speaker, and we've seen a lot of scientific data come out, and there's a confidence interval about that study. You have now data from lots of different studies, and what I would like to see is a confidence interval for multiple studies. And I'll give you 2 examples that I've listened to in the last 2 weeks. We had a public hearing for U.S. wind. One of the speakers stood on the stage and said, the oceans are not rising, Delaware is sinking. I thought that was a great one. Both may be true, but it really wasn't speaking to it. The second one would be fisheries. I got a lot of commercial fishermen down here. They would say stocks are going up, and the trawling data would say stocks are going down. And so I'm looking for the bigger kind of, how do you get not bad data and confidence interval across multiple studies to say we need to study here more. Not that your data is bad, but we need more data here, or we need different methodologies.
I'll try to address some of that, and then I might pass it to you, Jesse, to respond as well, because from my work and the work that we're doing on data governance right now, I think the way that I would approach that is one, to dig into data standardization so that it's easier to harmonize data sets, and then to get at that sort of confidence interval, as you described it, across many different studies with similar data types. Another way to get at some of that is to provide richer metadata where it includes information about how the people who collected the data are, how confident they are, other statistical measures, or just really a description of what, the confidence is in that particular data. So that would be how I would respond to your question right now. I don't know if you have, either of you have.
Yeah, sure. Just on the fisheries side, I think we're trying to move toward doing a better job of kind of incorporating multiple sources of information. For example, we have the Northeast Fisheries Science Center providing us with state of the ecosystem reports now that are kind of aggregating a number of different sources and trying to kind of characterize overall trends in what's going on. I mean, some of it comes back to the science communication problem of, communicating uncertainty around stock assessments and population estimates, and there can be a lot of regional variability with what people are seeing on the water, and we also try to have a lot of processes to incorporate input from folks that are fishing to kind of try to reconcile different trends in different places and to use that to inform our catch limit setting process in the Mid-Atlantic.
Yeah, so I'll just add a little bit on the uncertainty confidence intervals in the marine mammal models, or the kind of abundance modeling that takes place. So one of the parts of that workflow is that data comes in from all kinds of different observations, from ship surveys, from aerial surveys, and if it's collected in some standardized ways, then we can kind of combine uncertainty. We can understand uncertainty in a given location. And we're still working on, if data are collected in different ways, passive acoustics, for example, or whale watching or other kind of methods, how can we understand the uncertainty of those observation methods and how they cascade into the models that we create? And so there's some ongoing research, especially about passive acoustic monitoring and how that communicates uncertainty about the environment and our ability to detect the environment, because uncertainty is driven by both of those things. And it's complicated, but we're doing a good job, I think, of integrating data and capturing uncertainty when we set out the data collection in certain standardized ways. And so that's the way that we're helping with that sort of roll-up of uncertainty across different survey platforms.